This podcast is proudly brought to you by TreasuryONE, South Africa's leading treasury solutions company that unlocks financial value for your business. On this week's Currency Focus, we take a look at why the South African Rand is the best performing emerging markets currency and what's likely to happen to the unit this week. I'm Jackie Cameron for BizNews. Joining me today is Andre Cilliers of TreasuryONE. He's a currency strategist at TreasuryONE. Andre, it's been another very interesting week for the Rand.
Yes, it's been an interesting one. We broke through the 14 level. We went as low as 13.88 on Friday. I think it had something to do with the expectancy of ratings agencies coming out with their reports, and they came out quite early. But I think in anticipation of that, we had a bit of a rally. But it's also got a lot to do with interest rates and the movement of interest rates in America and the tapering or the non-tapering of quantitative easing, the movement in yields. I also want to say that there's a bit of a battle of the giants that's starting to take place, in the sense that we're also seeing some nice pockets of growth out of the European Union. Their vaccination program has really come off the ground quite well. The markets are opening up. Some of their lockdowns has been removed. It's getting into their summer period, and we're seeing some nice pockets of growth. And that's why I sort of, with a smile on the face, speak about the battle of the giants. You know, who's going to grow the quickest and the fastest, and what's the impact of that on the value of the dollar and the value of the euro.
And how does that growth in Europe feed into the value of the Rand?
We are trading with various countries throughout the world, and we've got a lot of trade with the European Union, and especially on our citrus side, for instance. You know, there's a lot of our citrus that goes into the European Union, but a lot of other trade as well. And if their economy is growing, it bodes well for our exports towards the European Union, and it also bodes well for, if the demand comes out of Europe, it might also be good for pricing, because you could see prices, apart from demand being lifted slightly because of the growth, could also be that there's a bit of an increase in pricing, which is well for the exporters from South Africa and our trade of terms then.
A number of analysts in South Africa have pointed to some sort of optimism about the South African economy showing signs of improvement, and they attribute this to the improvement in the value of the Rand. Where do you sit in relation to that argument?
Well, we are seeing some improvement in the economy, and we have seen last week during the Monetary Policy Committee of the South African Reserve Bank and the press conference after that, that they've also revised the growth figures slightly higher for South Africa. Now, we must remember that it's not just economic growth that looks on the upside at this point in time. It also means that if growth is better, it means that the income for the fiscal side also looks better, because then people are doing better. There's more spending, there's better taxes, there's better VAT income, and there's more income for the fiscal side. And if there's more income for the fiscal side, it puts a smile on Mr. Mboweni's face. So it's a general feel of optimism, and it's amazing how these things feed off. When these things happen and the economy does a little bit better and people feel a little bit better, then they go out and they spend a little bit more. You know, it's very much the same as the negative side. If people is in the doldrums and there's negativity coming through all the time, then they don't buy. When they're positive and they feel that it's going better, then they don't mind taking out their credit card and spending a little bit extra on top of what they would normally have spent. And that's exactly what you want at this point in time.
Then if you look at the Rand in relation to other emerging market currencies, why is the Rand so strong?
Well, I think if you look at our yields is attractive comparatively to the first world countries, number one. Number two, in terms of our standing within the emerging market space, if you just go and look at Brazil, for instance, that's seriously still plagued by the pandemic, by COVID-19. They recorded something just over 2,800 deaths in one day last week. Russia has still got some at loggerheads and still some sanctions against them by the United States. Turkey, we know that's in the doldrums. On the central bank side, we know that their governor was relieved of his duties by their prime minister. We know that there's interference from the political side, from the government side into the central bank. So we are in the emerging market space ranked fairly well, and I would say fairly at the top of the emerging market space, and hence we're doing a little bit better during this whole period. Because if you look at us, and as much as we'd like to criticize the government for a lot of things, then I do think that they have actually managed the whole COVID situation, the whole pandemic for the last 18 months. They've handled that fairly well. They've put money into the markets. They've assisted the markets. And there's always criticism that you can lodge, but in general, they've actually handled it very well. And if you look at the standing of Mr. Ramaphosa within his world rankings as a leader, then he's doing pretty well. And that's because the situation is being handled well during the whole pandemic.
There's talk that we might be in a third wave now in South Africa. How will this play into the value of the rand?
That's a bit worrisome that we are at the start of a third wave during a vaccination program that's not getting quite onto speed. But if I read between the lines, then I think it will go better within the next week or two. Some hiccups that we had last week in the first week where it was rolled out to the general public. But the third wave, I doubt whether that will have a dramatic impact on the value of the rand. I think it will be managed fairly well by the government. And I think when they look at regulations to be implemented to manage the third wave, I think they will seriously look at how to minimize the impact on the economy and rather look at social gatherings and stuff like that to avoid gatherings, etc., and the spread of the virus, but keep the economy going as good as possible. So I think it will be managed quite well. And if I look at the figures, I also think that the third wave might not be as severe as was initially anticipated that it could be.
So when you look at your figures and your extrapolations, where do you see the rand going in relation to the dollar? Do you think that it could go below 13 rand to the dollar, maybe back into the 12s?
Well, we have to look at the value of the dollar. It's very possible that the rand could go fairly well below 14. I'm not going to go as far as it's going to go into the 12 levels, but we have to watch the value of the dollar and what it does to the euro and to the pound, what it does to the first world countries like that. If we are going to see a euro going to 130, then, if you were to make some calculations and you say if the exchange rate of the rand to the euro just remains around the 17 level, and you take that divided by 1.35, then the rand could go to 12.60. But it would be my opinion that that's not going to happen. If the value of the euro goes as high as 135, for instance, I think we would see cross rates going up to the 18.25 levels against, so we would lose value against the dollar, against the euro, because of the immense strength of the euro. And in such a case, then you would be looking at a level of the rand around the 13.30. My forecast would be that we can go below 14, but that if that happens, and that's only on a very much weaker euro, a euro going very much higher, then we will remain within a 13.40 to 13.80 bracket. That movement is not something that's going to happen overnight. That's something that will happen over the next year if it happens. So I'm not too concerned. For this year, I think we remain within a trading range of 13.80 to 14.50, ending the year closer to the 14.50 levels.
And what's on your radar for this week that might surprise us or throw the rand out of sync with your forecast?
Quite a few interesting ones that comes out in terms of figures that comes out. Out of the US, we expect consumer confidence, we expect personal income, we get the GDP annualized quarter-on-quarter figures. So there's a number of figures out of the United States. Housing starts, there's a lot. From Tuesday, actually, right through to Friday. Those are numbers that's going to give us a very good indication of how well the economy is doing, how well the growth is going. And then we also have from 3 o'clock onwards today, and also during the week, we have quite a number of members of the Federal Reserve that speaks out and have press conferences. And then we'll get a feeling from their side as to what we can expect from the Fed going forward in terms of tapering on their quantitative easing, whether they will or whether they won't, and what the impact of that can be on short-term interest rates. And that can determine the path of the dollar, and we're going forward, whether going sharp weakening or sharp strengthening, some resilience or not. There's a few things this week that can upset the apple cart, but I don't think it will. And I think we will have a fairly stable week trading between 1390, 1420.
You've been listening to Andre Cilliers, currency strategist at TreasuryONE. I'm Jackie Cameron for Biz News. This podcast was proudly brought to you by TreasuryONE, South Africa's leading treasury solutions company that unlocks financial value for your business.